Hey, welcome to Out of Left Field. This is episode 1 of year 0 for a new political world that we have now found ourselves in, staggering out of our bunkers, bleary-eyed and devastated to some degree.
Yes, well, after the election, Mac and I here fell deathly ill since our favorite party got completely demolished in the election, as we predicted, I might add.
Well, you predicted. I was idiotically optimistic to the very end.
Yeah, well,
Every single poll, I was like, well, yes, the trend is downwards, but I'm sure that come the next poll, or eventually the day of the election, things will kind of move in the other direction. And it ended up going completely in the opposite direction. There was a prediction of around 60 to 80 seats, and we ended up getting 44, 45 or so.
Yep, 17.5% of popular support, just like the good old days.
Hey, now, those good old days were... Oh, don't even get me started. So many people on Facebook, NDP loyalists, are talking about the good old days and how this isn't really so bad because, you know, it used to be worse.
Yeah, that's that is exactly the kind of rationalization that I would expect someone to have.
Keep fighting the good fight and struggling on, and all those principles, Tommy Douglas and Broadbent and you know, the principles.
It was just the liberal media's fault.
Well, it is what they said, and to be fair, in this election, generally, one of the major, scoops of this election that we all got to find out was that actually the media is conservative in Canada. Post media is consistently 100% conservative as far as endorsements go and general opinions go.
Yeah.
The media, the scraps of the media that are not controlled by Post media tend to go evenly between the liberals and the conservatives, depending on the actual opinions of their editorial board, as opposed to the dictates of Post media. In any event, we already knew that in the last election. We knew that in the election before that. Unless the argument is that the media became more liberal in the last 4 years, which doesn't make any sense at all, then, you know, you'd have to explain why did we get so many seats last election and so few this election.
Yeah, well, just the fact that, blaming the media bias against the NDP is just kind of an easy cop-out, because everyone in the NDP knows that the media is never going to be on our side for the most part, so you just kind of have to deal with that. And if that's your best excuse as to why we performed so horrifically poorly in the last election, then you should really think up a more creative excuse than that, because it's always the case.
It's not just that. There's a sentiment, I think, definitely in the the upper leadership of the party, but within the party functionaries and the sort of the people who have jobs to do, the ones who are sort of running around NDP events with suits on,
right?
Those guys. They talk about the media being biased towards the liberals as some kind of almost with wistful looks in their eyes, like, oh, if only we could have that kind of control over corporate media like the liberals do, or if only we had corporate donors as well, that would be the difference. Not caring that there's a reason for that has to do with the party as a whole and its principles and all that sort of stuff, which were, I wouldn't say abandoned by Tom Mulcair, but definitely stifled and eventually ignored as the election went on.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about a turning point, it wasn't the liberal bias or conservative bias in the media. It wasn't the niqab issue, although that definitely was something that he just tripped right over like a bloody idiot. I mean, he had this weird mealy-mouthed support of it, like, well, I wouldn't be in favor of it, but people can do what they want, I guess.
Well, it's not an unreasonable position to take.
No,
really.
but
I agreed with him on it.
If you want to talk to the party loyalists and say it was because we took a principled stand for human rights, then say that. You know, don't give us this weird half-assed excuse of well, you know, it's wrong, I guess. I mean, it just doesn't matter. Or it's irrelevant because, you know, that's...
Okay, where do you think was the turning point? Was it...
No, the turning point was when he promised a balanced budget. I think that sent a clear message that what the NDP leadership was wanting to do and what Thomas Mulcair was really promising was something that, for everyone else in the country, meant austerity.
Right.
I don't think it would necessarily have been the case, but the fact remains that is the excuse given for austerity in every other scenario.
Yeah.
Even though, I mean, the NDP pointed out Mulcair pointed out, conservative governments aren't as good at balancing the budget as the NDP is on a provincial level, and that's pretty true. I mean, there's at least an argument to be made there, but and there's an argument to be made that austerity is an excuse to hurt poor people and attack social services, which I think is probably more true than balancing the budget, since that tends to be sort of the last possible goal in many cases. Cutting taxes and cutting services, just you end up with less going on, and more going to the rich, less going to the poor. Balancing the budget was definitely the turning point, if there was one. The fact of the matter was, though, is that the support of the NDP was just draining away throughout most of the election.
It was just steadily decreasing as time went on, because I think the NDP tried to replace the Liberals as the center left, and in our case center right party. And people didn't want that. People wanted progressive change. They wanted something different. And
serious change.
Yeah, and the Liberals just took the carpet right out from under their feet.
They just decided, hey, this would be perfect. We'll promise exactly what the NDP's doing, and we'll add on a couple more things. And
we'll even openly admit that we're going to go into deficit for 3 years.
Yeah, well, why not? We're in a recession, which was the most bizarre aspect of the NDP's promise. Right at the time when the NDP is criticizing the Conservative government, A, for not balancing the budget, and B, being in a recession.
Right.
When those two things often go together anyway. And then saying, even though there's going to be a recession, we'll balance the budget immediately.
What I find funny, other than the fact that Mulcair, for some inexplicable reason, other than the fact that he's a careerist, hasn't yet resigned, is that he has announced recently that he's going to hold a meeting with some of the defeated MPs and top party brass about what went wrong in the election and why they lost so badly. And from the perspective of almost everyone else, it's almost like if you have to ask what the reason was, then you're not going to get it because it's painfully obvious. Thomas Mulcair and his bullshit centrism was the reason. And that's, I think, why he's, having this meeting at all. Just the fact that he hasn't resigned yet, I think, is indicative of the fact that he has his head so far up his ass that he's not going to understand the problem.
If he wants to run for leader in a leadership convention, fine. If that's really what he wants to try to do. I mean, at the very least, he should be there should be a leadership convention, a clear decision by the membership of the party on whether or not to keep him.
And well, of course.
At the very, I mean, even
the fact that he
personally, I think he should just go away
forever.
Yeah, pretty much. He's taken the NDP to a situation that was worse, not just than the last one, but the one before that. Yeah,
and the last election was seen as sort of a historic opportunity for the NDP.
And exceptional. Let's face it. It was a lot of new ridings, a lot of people that really weren't involved in the NDP before, perhaps didn't really have much of a grounding in sort of principles of social democracy, that kind of thing. And that's it's worth saying that a lot of the people who lost were just effectively people that weren't involved in the party in any kind of dynamic way. But a lot of the people who lost as well were people who had been NDP MPs for years and years and years. Some of our most well-known, well-respected, and well-established political figures were wiped out in this election.
What I am really happy to see is that many of the newspapers and editorial boards, when they've been criticizing the NDP after this last election, have all agreed and have mentioned the same thing that left-wing activists within the NDP have been saying for decades, which is that what is the point of having a party of social democracy or socialism that's afraid of social democracy or socialism? It boggles the mind.
Yeah, well, they're just having a laugh at the NDP now. They're like, "Ha, you are just as useless as we've always said you were." Because when the moment came, when the pressure was on, you just buckled and made yourself just as irrelevant as ever. There's no reason to vote for someone other than the Liberals or Conservatives because they're the only ones who can get into power. And for all that you can say about it, they have a platform that is at least as left-wing, in the case of Liberals, as the NDP is. So what's the point? What's the point of voting for a party that can't form power, and particularly in this situation, isn't even relevant as part of a balance of power.
No, and they don't offer any, under Mulcair, of course, they don't offer any new ideas, nothing that's different. You know, they completely changed the dynamic and made themselves irrelevant in the process, which, again, I have to reiterate, how can Thomas Mulcair not see this? You know, it's just so obvious to everyone else. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, it's tough. But I mean, the good news is that a lot of those activists are taking a serious appraisal of the party. I don't think it's going to go away as far as the discontent goes. And the only good thing you could say about being kind of cut out of power is that we don't have to worry about an election for some time. So there's no
plenty of time for soul searching.
There's no campaign reason to avoid debate again, as always happens in the party, where there's like, well, you know, it's just after an election, so this isn't really an opportune time. We're readjusting to a new situation, win or lose, usually lose. And then when we start ramping up for an election, it's, well, you know, this is no time to start rocking the boat or causing divisions, because we have to all keep ourselves focused on winning the election, fighting for our principles.
You know, I don't think as much as you and I both dislike Thomas Mulcair, I don't think we should place 100% of the blame on him. Right?
No.
He is a symptom of a problem that has been systemic within the NDP for a long time.
No, he's not a particularly interesting figure, to be honest.
No.
I mean, I don't like him a lot. I don't like him personally. I generally don't really care about him, to be honest. All of the good things I had to say about him were generally regarding specific policy proposals that I thought were good. But
and he was a good parliamentarian too.
He was definitely very good at
good orator, etc.
Yeah, although he was the only other problem with him was that he was extremely partisan in like a very like he would fit in perfectly with the Conservative Party and, like, you know, John Baird and that kind of thing. Like the kind of parliamentarians who will attack his opponents on every issue, every single thing.
Yeah.
And you know there's a good side and a bad side to that. The good side is you get someone who can, you know, get to the meat of an issue, but on the bad side of it is that it seems entirely arbitrary sometimes, the stuff he'll criticize the government for.
You know, I think it's funny. During the election there was a controversy about Mulcair having been offered a cabinet position with the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
And the excuse that Thomas Mulcair and the NDP gave was, oh, well, you know, our principles were out of line, and it really came down to environmental policy. We couldn't support the Harper conservative stance on the environment.
That's odd.
It's like, that's the one thing that okay, well, sure, that's a good thing to disagree with them on, but did you agree with them on everything else?
I mean, well,
were you just willing to be like, oh, okay, tax,
he was
tax breaks for the rich? Sure.
I mean, to be fair, it's actually quite possible that was the reason he gave at the time, because he was Minister of the Environment under the Liberals provincially in Quebec. Yeah, that was his job, so it would make sense that had been the reason he gave. But like so many things, when he's sort of questioned on his own history or on matters of principle, he has always just defaulted to this like weird bureaucratic kind of mindset of like, well, I was the environment minister and I disagreed with them, so it came down to a matter of the environment. Or when he's criticized for supporting, you know, Margaret Thatcher, and it's like, well, you know, I stand by what I said because I believed it at the time, blah 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 blah. And it's like, well, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't just... You're a politician. You can't just say things and expect people not to care. These answers matter, because that's the only way we can tell what sort of politician you are, what you believe in, what's relevant to you, and is it relevant to me as well? That's the whole reason we have campaigns. That's why leaders like Tom Mulcair are relevant at all, is because they're supposed to be able to embody the interests and ideas of the political party they're leading.
And Mulcair is in a, you know, at a bar somewhere with a shot of whiskey and thinking to himself, man, I said all the right things. I rehearsed them.
Case in point, the balanced budget thing, right? NDP governments generally balance budgets more often than their counterparts provincially. Everybody likes balanced budgets. Balanced budgets are a good thing. We're going to promise to balance the budget.
Yeah.
Because we're the NDP. What could go wrong? Why would anyone criticize us for this? What would be the problem? You know, and then everyone's like, well, you know, balanced budgets in a recession means cutting services. That's how this happens, especially when he also comes out the same period talking about how he's going to scale back. He was like clarifying just how the corporate tax increases would actually occur, and it turns out his vision of, aggressively taxing corporations was in fact less than what the Liberals were going to do.
Yeah.
And with that and the balanced budget, what people saw was this big gaping hole in the money where everyone was saying, well, what are you going to do? I mean, where's that money going to come from? If you're not going to raise taxes on the very wealthy...
By a substantial degree.
Yeah, by a substantial degree. And the Socialist Caucus, the NDP, was in the papers specifically criticizing them for this, saying you're going to have to, if you want to pay for all this, you have to aggressively tax corporations. Like, substantially more than even what anyone's suggesting, because this is what it will take.
And that's what people would have expected of the NDP anyways, and what vast swaths of the working class actually really want.
And once again, we, well, you can't do that because we would have lost, right? people wouldn't have voted for the NDP. They would have voted for the Liberals.
That's too radical. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Jesus. Well, they fucking voted for the Liberals because God, that's frustrating.
Well, yeah. There is a point to be made there that a lot of the positions that we're talking about, as socialists, aren't the views of the majority of Canadians. Fair enough. That's hardly all that surprising. But regardless of... This is sort of getting down to the core problem of the NDP. Their disinterest in debating policy at all, principles at all, in any real substantive sense, is undermining their ability to make these decisions and leading to the Liberal Party being able to just outmaneuver them at every turn.
Well, it's funny because the NDP actually does a lot of debating about policy at their conventions.
Well, yeah, but those happen once a year, and the people who can get to convention have to go through a whole system of...
Well, yeah, there's all this bureaucratic stonewalling, and whenever a subject is brought up that the party brass doesn't like, the debate
Palestine.
The debate is cut short, or they silence it, or the vote doesn't count, or it's non-binding.
It just goes to tabling.
They just do everything they possibly can to maintain a status quo that isn't even really serving them that well now anyway.
It is. It's the appeal is always to unity, but that sort of thing is a false unity because it doesn't provide us with any direction. It's just we're sticking together in kind of like just sort of this defensive fortress that we can't ever escape from, and it will, if it gets really bad, the NDP will eventually just get smaller and smaller and smaller,
and fade into irrelevancy.
Yeah,
it'll be like the Bloc Québécois.
Well, it's happened before. Although I will say, at least with the NDP, I think the thing that has kept the NDP alive is its connection to the labor movement, generally.
But the labor movement
has the same problems, right? With a lack of vision, a lack of aggressiveness, and sort of purely defensive policies that are allowing them to become isolated and slowly picked apart.
Yes.
Well, I think that's another good example of how the NDP and the labor movement are essentially the same thing in Canada, for good or bad. Mostly bad these days.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the labor movement in general is not doing very well, and you see a lot of growth in service sector jobs and high tech jobs. Neither of those are really well represented at all within the labor movement, and are, for completely different reasons in either case, are very difficult to unionize. So I don't really see very good things for the labor movement, when in fact I think that a really strong, aggressive labor movement is what is needed, especially in the service sector where you have really vulnerable populations that are getting screwed over constantly. And
they're some of the most dangerous jobs around. I mean, in the case of like convenience store clerks, you're talking about one of the jobs where you're most likely to get shot while working.
Also with fast food restaurants too, and a lot of retail jobs, the big employers are instituting new kinds of software scheduling programs that people's shift comes up. I have to work at 6 a.m. tomorrow. I just got a text.
You get every single shift scheduled about 24 hours in advance without really reference to anything. Yeah,
and then you have people that are working 2 or 3 jobs, and all of their employers are using this software, and their shifts overlap. Yep. And it's a complete nightmare. This is exactly the kind of thing where the labor movement needs to step in and organize and say, this is not acceptable. You cannot do this to people. This is not fair. I mean, that's just besides the fact that they're getting paid shitty wages, which is the whole reason why they have to work 2 or 3 jobs in the first place. But my God, I really wish that both the labor movement and the NDP could get their heads out of their asses and see the broader picture here, and that they have to change and fall back to their roots and the principles that they were founded on. The kinds of unstable periods of capitalism where the labor movement and the NDP were, founded and slowly began to thrive, we're seeing a resurgence of those kinds of economic conditions. And except in this point in history, we have this sort of party brass and top crust of the labor movement and NDP that have careers on the line and salaries on the line, and they kind of want to maintain things the way they are so they don't lose their own jobs.
I don't know if it's that cynical on their part. I mean, it might be. These things usually tend to be a bit of an overlap.
I don't mean it in that they're doing it consciously, but it's just sort of people.
Parliamentarians.
People usually fight for their own interests.
Well, yeah, that's true. I just mean, I don't want to become an apologist for Thomas Mulcair here, or Tommy, as we're supposed to call him. But he is a man who obviously has a completely different understanding of what his job is. His vision seems to be that, the NDP is full of good people, and that's really all it takes. It's just a matter of political will. It's not, these theoretical issues we're talking about, like matters of the distinctions between social democracy and socialism and what the role of capitalism is and what it is capable of, are unnecessary distractions that divide us, and therefore we should just be focusing on our good people who want to do right by the country. And that's good enough. If we want to balance the budget, it's because we're good people and we want to do it for the benefit of the country as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly the kind of attitude that has lost us this last election. That they don't look at those issues. So Justin Trudeau's prime minister. I mean, I'm happy that Stephen Harper is gone and he's resigned, and we don't have to see his stupid face ever again.
Well, no, that's not true. He might make a comeback. I mean, Stockwell Day did for sort of briefly.
No, Stockwell Day retired.
No, he resigned from leader of the alliance, but he ended up coming back as minister of public safety.
That's right.
That could happen to Stephen Harper. He could be put in charge of all the police in the country under the next conservative government in 2020 or whatever, 2019.
Right. Well, yeah, I guess you never know.
These guys don't go away, and let's be clear here. He's not the only angry old white guy in the Conservative Party. And since apparently the Liberals and Conservatives are the natural ruling parties of this country, there will come a day when another Stephen Harper, under a different name, under a different face, will suddenly be prime minister. And those people who talk about, Justin Trudeau now, or will be wistfully looking back on it as some kind of golden age. We'll be wondering what happened again, because that's what every time it happens under the Liberals, it's this they get a fairly long honeymoon period, and then strange and contradictory and sort of unprincipled things start happening. And to be perfectly honest, they do a lot of the same things the Conservatives do. They just apologize for it.
Yeah, well,
I want more from a government than apologies.
Well, yeah, they do have a history of campaigning to the left and governing to the right, and we will see how Justin Trudeau fares.
Well, that's the sort of question of the day now.
I mean, interestingly, he has openly admitted that he'll go into deficit.
He's openly admitted. I like how you say that, like it's some kind of horrible personal fault. I admit that I am a deficit spender. I have been my whole life. I was born this way. It was my father who taught me.
I will be really interested in particular to see if he fulfills his promise to
be better than Stephen Harper.
Well,
he already has. Well, that was the main promise of this campaign, Ben. Don't forget to get rid of Stephen Harper.
Yeah.
That campaign promise has been fulfilled.
Already, yeah.
Oh, wow. First day.
Case
first day of a new Liberal government.
Okay, but I'm interested to see if he will actually go through with proportional representation of some form.
Yeah, that's the big thing for me.
That's the big issue.
There's a lot of issues regarding the reorganization of environmental laws to bring them back into sort
existence.
Consistency, because there's huge holes in it now. The changing of laws regarding scientists and scientific inquiry, that kind of thing. Although I don't know if that's really something that seemed to be something that the conservatives had to like aggressively persecute scientists. I think even if the liberals do nothing, they'll still come out ahead on that point.
Yeah, that's true, and it's not exactly like a sexy campaign issue. Like, hey, we're gonna
and now that it's done,
persecuting
now that all that
scientists.
money has been sort of stripped out of boring shit like saving lives and is just being put into economic issues like mining and forestry and resource extraction sciences and things like that.
Yeah.
The liberals don't really have to do anything. They can just say, well, we're spending so much money on science. It just so happens we're not really doing it from a humane standpoint. But that's one thing. CBC and the Postal Service are the other two things. But yeah, the biggest one is proportional representation.
It seems to be the thing that
huge
irritates people on the center left and left of the spectrum the most out of anything.
And I wouldn't be surprised if right wingers would, if given the opportunity, not enjoy it as well.
Sure. What I'm skeptical of though is Justin Trudeau now has a majority, so it's not exactly in his interest to change the voting system. In the long run, yes, it probably is, but in the short run, not exactly going to help him out. Number two, I think the kinds of proportional representation systems that the Liberals would institute would be different than the ones that the NDP would.
STV versus...
Yeah, so he was thinking about...
Single transferable vote where you have a list of candidates and then you just number them in whatever way you want in order of preference.
Yeah, but what I don't like about that system... The reason I think a lot of people in Canada are in favor of a proportional system is because it would help smaller parties actually get votes. Like the Green Party is the classic example, right? But under a system that didn't penalize parties just for being small, you could have other parties, like say the Pirate Party or hell, the Christian Heritage Party, actually get seats if they have like 1 or 2%. And that's where you'd have a system like a mixed member proportional system, right?
That's the difference, because you can vote for your local candidate and then you vote for whatever party you want. And the problem I have with STV is I think it would still end up being biased against independent candidates.
I think so too. I think you're still going to rank them based on who has the highest probability of winning anyway. So what really would change there? The thing about mixed member system is that you still get parts of the traditional system where you have your parties and whatever, but you also can elect local representatives or representatives from smaller parties, and everything gets evened out.
Why? I mean, the fact is, and this is sort of one of those classic, I don't know, almost libertarian attitudes as far as like, Parliament wasn't designed for political parties. We're not supposed to have political parties. We're supposed to...
Who says that?
Well, lots of people talk about how political parties are supposed to be kind of more of a fluid thing. It's more of something that a candidate will... I mean, early on in the Canadian political system, you would be electing local representatives for the most part, affiliated with a political party. They'd usually be like party bosses who would be helping win other seats for their leader. But realistically, people would switch and flip over all the time. And now that the political parties in Canada and everywhere in the world really have solidified into coherent camps, it kind of exposes one of the major flaws of our system, that it is expecting everyone in the country to care most about their own actual riding, when that's not at all true. Poll after poll has shown that the major deciding factor for most people on who they'll vote for is the party. Not the individual candidate, not local issues.
Well, there are still people that whine about those. But...
There are, but if we're talking about Canadians generally, it is a matter of which political party you want to support. And the problem I have with STV is that will still be the case. And so you'll be biasing people against people that might be more interesting or representative of their interests on a local level. I think with MMP... you could have clearly defined, basically, camps where, you have your national candidates running under political parties, and you have local candidates running perhaps under a party affiliation or just independently. And they can win or lose on the basis of that.
Well, I thought the whole point of having ridings was so that we did have...
That's what I'm saying, is that was the original intent of this kind of system. But the
Yeah.
fact is that we don't actually do that. And throughout most of the history of the Canadian political system, we haven't really cared as much about that.
I would like to see some electoral reform, but I would hate to see it go to an STV system, because it's not like the voting system is going to get changed for an
Well.
awful long time after that, because this is kind of a historic opportunity, the first in Canadian history.
We can change our electoral system as many times as we want.
It's just not likely to happen.
The major impediment is going to... Well, I think it would be likely to happen if voter turnout was lower, or if it still ended up with like a disproportionate number of seats going to some party somehow.
Well, the Liberals got a majority with less than 40% support this last election.
Well, so what? That's enough. That's been enough for a long time.
Yes, but people aren't happy with that, because
Well,
it
too
gives
bad.
majority control to a minority.
Well, that's why the
people.
NDP should
And
just
that's the
go
whole
away,
fucking
or
point.
the block.
That's
or
no,
whatever.
that's the whole point of having a proportional system, is so you don't have that kind of disproportionate.
Yeah, it is a bit
power.
odd. It is a bit odd to have that kind of power and also say that the electoral system is broken.
Yes.
I mean, to do that is a bit strange.
So he better change
the
damn
electoral system
I will
and
be
then...
so everyone will be so mad.
Well, now he's not Stephen Harper, so you know.
So we're still better off.
One out of
let's
two.
Settle for less.
Well, that's the problem,
more.
right? I mean, that's the issue with the whole anything but etc. movements. There's nothing to it. It's easy to find someone who isn't Stephen Harper. There's
that really
millions of Canadians out there.
It reminds me of the election where Barack Obama was elected, where it was basically the anyone but the Republicans election, and there happened to be only one option there. And he ran on a very vague, general sort of happy feels kind of a campaign.
What are you
and
saying?
got in a landslide.
You didn't understand what he meant by change?
Well, apparently, I'll just
Apparently
say
not.
that persecuting journalists, whistleblowers, and assassinating people with drones was not what I thought that he meant by that.
They're enemy combatants and foreign spies, Ben. Well, some of them probably might have been. In any event, yeah, it's the same problem, and I do think... I mean, I can rag on about STV all day long, but I do think either one of them would be better than what we currently have.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, if he implements STV, then okay, sure. I'm still gonna complain a little bit, but I'm still gonna be happy that we don't have first past the post, because it's a terrible system. But what I think will be kind of interesting to watch, at least from our peripheral vision, is what will happen to the Conservatives now that Stephen Harper is gone.
Yeah, well, now my position on this had been, pretty much until a few weeks ago, pretty much since the last election, actually, was that when Stephen Harper goes, the Conservative Party will probably break up. I figured it was quite likely that the Conservatives would lose the next election. I mean, just because of the sort of that very, very low, relatively, level of support they were able to get. They just were not able to get above a couple, like 30% or so. Like they just could not get above that. And while we can talk about 40% and 30%, it's not a huge difference. But the fact is that whatever when we're talking about the Conservatives, they had a very clear ceiling that the Liberals and the NDP even didn't have. And so they were facing something similar to what the Republicans have been facing in the United States, where there seemed to be this sense that there's like a mathematical impossibility for them to ever gain power again. And so I figured that given that, they would break up. They would the social conservatives, who've been basically voiceless in this by that government, will finally break off, or there would be sort of a new reform movement that would be that was disgusted with Stephen Harper and his autocratic style of governance. At this point, I'm not really sure what will happen. I think if there's an STV system, it's quite likely that will happen, that the Conservative Party will splinter into sort of composite groups, but if not, they might just hold it together and just hope for the best and try to find a leader who isn't disgusting to most of the country.
Well, that would be a good start. I wouldn't say, like, clearly the Conservatives had a limit of about 30 to 32% during the election. But let's not forget, this was after many years of Conservative rule, and people were sort of fatigued with their continuous governance. I mean, give it another 4 to 8 years, and there will be some more dissatisfied people with the Liberals and who are frustrated with their government, and they didn't do everything they said they were going to do, and it's the same shit that happens all the time in Canadian politics, and it just goes back and forth between the Liberals and Conservatives. And similarly in the United States between the Democrats and the Republicans. So the NDP's really got to get its shit together, damn it, because otherwise we're just going to keep going on this pendulum back and forth until there's some other substantive change or party that's willing to at least talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, the whole pendulum effect of the Conservatives and Liberals, it's like the Conservatives write the legislation and the Liberals essentially use it.
To their own advantage?
Yeah, well, yeah. It's kind of an ironic situation, really, that we should be congratulating Stephen Harper as the major impetus for democratic participation in this country. I expect after 4 years of a Liberal government that the number of people who will be voting will be much lower.
Probably, yeah, because people will be like, "Oh yeah, they're not so bad. Things are pretty
I don't need
good."
to be worried about this. There's no real reason to vote. Whatever. Who's the Prime Minister again? I don't know. Who cares?
Yeah, people were so incensed at the Conservatives and what demagogues they were. It did drive the biggest voter turnout in a long time.
Their attacks on the environment, the racism.
Damn it, what I want to see is that voter turnout be increased because of some party that was actually offering something that was really inspiring. Yeah, I know. How naive of me.
Yeah. That don't happen, Ben. Come on. I mean, last time that happened, it was Barack Obama, and you don't like him either.
Yeah,
he was an inspiring figure. He got people out to...
He sure was.
He was. Definitely a politician of his era. For all that we could say about our political system, it does at least have a vastly different degree of dynamic, I guess, activity compared to the American political system.
What I felt was interesting with this last election, if you look at the seat count and what areas went Conservative, Liberal, or NDP.
Yeah.
It was much more regionalized than the last election, like by a large degree. Basically, for the NDP, they got the west coast of BC and chunks of Quebec. The Conservatives got all the massive rural areas. And
Alberta, most of
Saskatchewan, Manitoba, some parts of Ontario, and the Liberals took everywhere else.
Most of they took the Maritimes in Ontario. Really, was their huge gains.
Yeah, and lots of parts of Vancouver and Toronto. But it it definitely exposed the divisions in Canadian society based on how the seats turned out.
I think the real regional party at this point is the Conservatives. I mean, the look at that huge blue blotch in the middle of the country.
That blue shit stain in the middle of the map.
Christ! Just because, I understand you don't like the Conservatives, but come on, it's taking it a step too far, man. I mean, shit isn't even blue. That doesn't even make sense.
You agree with me.
We could spend the whole time talking about how much we hate the Conservatives, and I'd certainly be happy to do that. But I feel that at least a mild desire to be a little bit more useful, I guess.
Well, yeah, echo chamber.
Well, I mean, the whole country is an echo chamber as far as anti-conservative sentiment goes these days.
Well, not anymore. It's kind of faded into the past. Now there's this hope and optimism.
It's faded into the past. That was a week ago.
Yeah. No, now people are like, oh, Trudeau, he's so good. He's going to save everything. And
it'll be just like the 60s and 70s again.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, just not with the growing economy. Same but slightly different.
Yes, what people don't realize is that was kind of the underpinnings of why the 60s and 70s were so great, was because you could just go to college and then get a job after that and retire and buy a house and all sorts of things that our generation probably will never ever do.
Well, certainly not in the same degree.
No.
And there's plenty of things, of course, that the Liberals, for all that we can praise, the fact that he's not Stephen Harper, and we'll probably do at least a few good things, and that's worth paying attention. There's lots of stuff because it's not the 1960s anymore. There's lots of stuff that the Liberals just aren't going to be able to do.
No, it's true. I do think that he'll have a good 1 or 2 year honeymoon period where he can just sort of repeal the worst excesses of the conservative reign over the last couple of years, and people will support him. And then the harsh realities of the new economic climate will sit in, and or maybe he'll just grossly mismanage the economy, and the conservatives will take advantage of that and shout and repeat their stupid propaganda about balanced budgets.
He said 3 years of deficits, and that will be enough time for him to have a balanced budget going into the next election. But that's a long time from now, and there's nothing in the state of our economy right now that suggests anything that's really good news. Even balancing the budget in 4 years is something I suspect they're not going to be able to do.
I would be... Well, I mean, we can't tell the future.
Without aggressive taxation of corporations and the highest tax brackets, it's going to be very difficult to find that money.
Well, yeah, especially because the conservatives spent so much time and effort curtailing our economy towards oil extraction and resource development, and then the price of oil took a nosedive. So you were kind of left with this empty basket, and how do you restructure an economy? I mean, the kind of things that you have to do to shape an economy on a macro level is this takes years to change. Even if you wanted to invest in clean energy and high tech and like the new economy and stuff, this takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of time, and Harper had 9 years to fuck shit up, and I think you're going to need at least the same amount of time to reverse that trend and allow new opportunities and new economic conditions to grow and prosper. So I mean,
that is the eternal excuse for every liberal government, though. The conservatives, they just work faster than we do, so we don't have enough time to undo
and then do our own.
We undo about 70% of what they did, and then there's another election that we lose.
Right.
You
just didn't give us enough time.
Yeah, you need to trust us more. Give us more power. Just like everyone, the right wingers did with the conservatives. Just give us more power, and we'll do what you want in your name. Just don't get in our way. We have to take shortcuts and maybe make bad decisions. And in the case of the liberals, historically, funding a massive corruption scandal and all that sort of stuff to stay in power. That was the reason. We got to stay in power. Got to keep the country together. Can't let the separatists win.
Can't let the conservatives win. Can't let the separatists win. Can't let the NDP win.
Can't let the liberals win. It just goes around and round and round. And in all of that, there's all this stuff that the liberals are probably not going to be able to do. There's plenty of problems. The environment's one of them. They haven't set any goals or even hinted that they're ever going to set goals on the environment. They want to protect the environment, but it's more of just the abstract desire more than anything else.
Well, I don't know. There's a few things that you could do. For example, replenish the protections on lakes and rivers and water systems.
But that would get us back to a point where we were already damaging those lakes and rivers.
Okay, sure.
I mean, we weren't doing well before the conservatives came along.
No. Well, that's probably true, but damn it, I want to just protect the fucking lakes.
Fine.
I just want that to happen.
Put up 100 fucking signs. Go ahead. But, the tar sands will still keep churning out more CO2s, more pollution, more, tailing ponds seeping into local groundwater. It's a huge problem, and the liberals, and to be fair, basically none of the political parties have had a really clear way of solving this.
Nobody wants to deal with it, except the thing that I can't comprehend at this point is that the price of oil is so low. Doesn't it make the tar sands kind of irrelevant?
No, there's
so many
profitable.
people have been laid off.
A lot of people are still working there. It's still a huge industry. It's a question of balance of trade as well. It's a major export. So, that's important to have a balance of trade, particularly in exchange for our environment. That's the excuse given. And there's lots of other reasons. It's part of the economy, and particularly when there's a recession happening, this is not the time to start attacking productive aspects of the economy. That's how this always works. If things are doing well, there's no reason to change. If things are doing poorly, there's no reason to change.
There are some attractive things about Canada, particularly our low dollar in relation to the U.S. currency, that we could take advantage of and sort of gear our economy away from oil production. But as I mentioned earlier, this is the kind of thing that takes years. Like take high-tech jobs, for example, right? A lot of companies actually like outsourcing their call centers to Canada because we are comparatively cheap in terms of labor costs, but we also are English speaking as our first language, and that's, people,
Helpful.
Americans like that when they call support.
The Americans don't just like that; they demand.
They demand it. Yeah, exactly.
They find it personally offensive if
people don't speak English as a first language. Yeah, trust me, I know.
Oh, if you've gone on and on and on and on and on about it.
Okay, but this is the kind of thing that Canada is kind of uniquely situated to do.
Yeah,
right? And so
call center of the world. It'd be great.
Sure, why not?
Well,
I mean, it's better than
doing nothing,
or just letting the tar sands continue on, or allowing the biggest job growth to be in like the retail and service centers.
Well, sure, but I mean, call centers aren't exactly not service centers anyway.
They're a small notch above.
Well,
that's
maybe
worth fighting for. Damn it.
That's a really pathetic argument, and also it's probably not a huge boon to the economy anyway. I mean, if you're talking about like trade,
okay, it was just an example. There's other things.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is that unless there's a willingness to nationalize the oil industry, these kind of fiddly little details, while interesting, are always going to end up falling short of what a fucking country this size needs to function. We can't just say, oh, well, there'll be jobs, don't worry, technology will solve it. When technology has been doing nothing but the exact opposite. It's been finding ways to reduce the number of people working.
That's true. It's funny, every couple of months, one of the major tech companies, be it Twitter or Microsoft or IBM, just sort of silently announces that they're going to be laying off 14% of their workforce. And yeah, I mean, if there is one thing that high tech is good at, it's reducing the number of employees they have. But I mean, I'm a proponent for.
I'm not against progress. I'm not against technology.
Technology only works though
if people
if people benefit from it, if they don't get laid off because of it, and that's why capitalism and this new high tech economy are really incompatible, because all it's doing is it is creating less work for people, but that also means that less people have work. So unless you have some sort of planned economy or socialist nationalized system that's democratically controlled and owned, where we share work and decide things democratically how they're run, then technology will be against the general interest of people in a sense.
Yeah, well, I agree with that, and it certainly is. These are the sorts of issues, although this is kind of fairly high level, but this is exactly the kind of stuff that the liberals will be completely incapable of addressing. They talk about the tech industry like it's just, well, it's a good thing that people like, and technology's good, and
they're
it'll
good
there
paying
you
jobs,
go.
and yeah,
it's just trading one word for another. Polluting industries or high tech, green tech industries. And there you go. Simple, right? Like but that's not how it works. I mean, we're talking about industries that employ hundreds of thousands of people versus industries that employ thousands of people.
Yeah.
And unless you can address that more directly, and I think that would have been an excellent thing for the NDP to bring up in this election, would have been something that I think the NDP would have been uniquely suited to do, particularly because of their connection to labor movement and to the CLC and independent or different provincial labor federations. Just that this argument of being able to actually address these problems on that kind of high level is something that is a constant bugbear for the party, because it's so completely unprepared to do.
Well, yes, and I think that no one's prepared for the high-tech economy, Mac. But
this is political. This is politics. The politics didn't just come about yesterday.
Listen, the whole party brass that controls the NDP are not probably super tech-savvy people. I don't think that's exactly their specialty.
I'm not talking about being tech-savvy. I'm not talking about understanding, what SSH is and any of that. Like, you don't need to know anything about computers to understand the value of a job. That's it. I mean, this is the basic point that I would assume that the people in the NDP and in the labor movement would understand. That if there's something that needs to be done and there's work required to do it, that's a job. That's it. That's what you do. and whinging about how I don't understand this and that. Well, fucking hell, I don't understand most of the industries that exist in this country. I don't declare them to be irrelevant simply because I don't know how they work.
Yes, but I just think the only reason I brought it up is because I think it could be an opportunity for a new youthful movement within the party to
hopefully
bring forward new ideas and change things. Because I don't think the existing party brass is in any position or willing to do that themselves.
Well, I do think that the future of the party will be with its more youthful, interested, active members.
Yeah,
not the people who are currently running it.
But the party needs to do a lot more to inspire young people to join it and to be active. And I don't think they are in any position to do that right now. We need to do a little bit of soul searching.
Yeah, then the fact of the matter is that there's plenty of people in the NDP right now who will be doing that and who have been calling on Mulcair to resign. And, well, to be fair, as I said at the beginning, it doesn't look like he's going to be doing that. It'd be a good start.
I think so. Maybe we can do the same thing we did to Carol James and eventually just have a insurrection and force her to resign.
No, what we need is, a Canadian Corbyn. That's what we need.
Corbyn?
Yeah.
What is Corbyn?
From Britain.
Oh, no, I totally agree. But who the hell is that?
Well, he's a...
No. Who is the Canadian Corbyn?
Well, we don't have one.
Yes.
Not right now. Although, to be fair, anyone could be. Realistically, politics isn't about...
age.
Well, it's not just a matter of age. It's not about... sort of your willingness to stick with principles you already hold. Politics is often about changing your mind, and if any particular MP or member of the party would be willing to take on a much more dynamic and interesting sort of role in the party, I wouldn't care so much about their history, to be honest.
Yeah, well, it's about their ideas, and we are lacking those, and so any takers?
Hey, takers.
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe you'll be the next leader of the NDP.